I was out in Detroit for 4 days last week, and the Wayne State College medical students wanted to invite Dr. Jeffries. But we got hold of a letter that the black medical staff, the physicians and nurses and technicians, wrote to the president of the Black Students Union telling them why they shouldn't invite Dr. Jeffries, and threatened the students with their future being predicated on whether, these are black folks now, on their future was dependent on whether they invited Len Jeffries or not. The students, of course, got frightened by this and did not invite Dr. Jeffries. This is a school in a 90% black town, and these were black people in that school telling black students that they couldn't listen to Dr. Jeffries because the Jews didn't want them to listen to him. But they say they have no power, and they say they have no influence. But the influence is deeper than that. Every black community in the country, every black community from L.A., where they put Bradley up there and kept him in power so that they can run the black community and L.A. the way they want it, to New York, they need a transition period while they argue their differences with the Italians and work it out. So they stuck David in there as an interim Jew so he can hold power for them while the Jews and the Italians negotiate the terms upon which they would run New York City. And once they had worked that out, they got rid of the Negro, gave him a job at Columbia University. This question of having these people wanting to be at the leadership of our movement but not wanting to be about any African ideological perspective or philosophical perspective on reality. This assumption that we are a blank, neutral slate just waiting for other people to come and stamp on us their acronyms. That we have no history. And watch the revolutionaries, watch the ideologues, and watch what they're saying. If we proceed from where they're coming from with these foreign ideologies and foreign analytical frameworks, and an analytical framework is designed to look at certain things based on what is in the historical environment in which it was designed. So if it wasn't designed in a African historical environment, it's not designed to look at that environment in a way that it should be looked at. So they're coming and saying, yes, Africa must be free. Pan-Africanism. Now they're using the term revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And you ask one of them, what is Yoruba? And they don't know what you're talking about. You ask them, what is Bakongo? They don't know what you're talking about. You ask them, what is Rwanda? Other than that, it's a place. They don't know what you're talking about. You ask them, what is Dogon philosophy? They don't know what you're talking about. You ask them about Akan philosophy, Ewe philosophy. They don't know what you're talking about. How are you then going to go and free a people who already have an existence, who already have an understanding and an idea of life, who already have a philosophy and a way of resolving problems, even though they've been set upon by the foreign imperialism of Christianity, Islam, white, British, French, Belgian, and other cracker colonial economic institutions? They've never abandoned what was theirs. And the average African life still beats to the drum of traditional behavior. But they're forced by foreign political institutional constructs to have to belittle their actual philosophical, psychological, and spiritual self in order to identify with this political and economic foreign intrusion in order to provide food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. And then we come and say we're going to liberate them from that, and we bring another foreign perversion to do it with. Rather than showing some deep respect for our people, our ancestry, our history, and our tradition, and go to them and say, teach us your way. Let us examine your histology. Let us examine your institutions. Let us examine your religious construct. Let us examine your view of God. Let us examine how you put value on human life. Let us examine on what value you put on yourself. Let us ask you what value you put on the rest of the world based on your traditional system. Let us examine what is it that was taken away that we should examine to see if it should be restored. We don't go and say that. We go with an arrogant, white, racist, perverted assumption in our black skins, and again trying to imprison our people's minds and put the same arrogant, white elite philosophy at the top of our world. So what I'm proposing is very simple. If we Africans, let's start acting like it. If we don't know how to do that, let's find out. We must have had some view of why people were married before we met the white man. We must have had some view on what a relationship between children and parents were before we met white people. We must have had some view of what relationship between males and females should be before we met white people. We must have had some view on how we distribute the goods that provided food, clothing, and shelter before we met white people. We must have had some view on how we store surplus for the times when it was needed. We must have had some view on how we take care of the elderly. We must have had some view on how we take care of the infirm. You mean we had no views on these things? Far from just having views, we had institutions that are so complex and so beautiful that they have stood up under all of the colonialism and all of the imperialism and all of the cracker capitalism and all of our foolish Marxist negative intrusion and all of the Islam gone astray, Arabism being disguised as religion. That don't mean all of what we call Islam is that, but too much of it is Arabism described as religion, Arab imperialism hiding behind Islam. Too much Christianity. We say, yeah, Christianity was born in Africa. And that may well be true. But who was living in that part of Africa when it was given birth to? We need to ask that question. And two, it may have been born in Africa, but it was grafted and mutated into something else in Europe before it got back to Africa. So we can't just say because it was born in Africa and we throwing a dashiki and throwing some kente, we can say now the church, even without changing its character, is valid. Because it is not valid. It is not valid unless the church, unless the mosque sees itself as primary revolutionary leadership ready to lead people to the cost of death to themselves in order to have freedom. Because they have a greater influence over the psyche and the consciousness than any other instrument in society. And if that instrument in society that is in control of the psyche of the people does not lead them towards a freedom march, then that instrument is an enemy of the people and should be dismantled in any way it can. Because the one thing your religion ought to tell you is how to be free and how to stay free. I'm just going to read you some definitions. Dr. Wade Noble have this wonderful little book out that nobody can find anywhere. I must have the only copy in New York City. And every time I recommend it to people, they come back and say, I can't find it anywhere. It's called Understanding the Black Family. And Dr. Noble has a good glossary. And I just want to read some of them. And because we tape everything, I'm reading this into the record, and then you get hold of the tape and you can listen to it. Since it seems like, and I'm guilty of it sometimes, but I try not to be guilty of it anymore, stop coming to lectures without having a pencil and a pad. I don't understand why y'all do that. Bring a pencil and some paper and take some notes while the thing is fresh in your mind. You hear, this is like a part of our university system, and this is something we got to do. Now, Dr. Noble, in his book, Understanding the Black Family, and he was arguing that white people and white scientists and white scientific methodology could not be used for understanding the black family because it was coming out of a white perspective and it was coming out of white supremacist bias, and no matter how fair they wanted to be, their white supremacist bias wouldn't let them be. So he took this book to explain it. Then there's a couple of concepts I want to just bring up, one called scientific colonialism and the other called transubstantiation, that I'm going to discuss as I end this discussion. But Dr. Noble's definition for Afrocentricity, he said Afrocentricity is the intellectual and philosophical foundation used to develop the political, scientific, and moral criterion for authenticating the reality of African family processes. It is the utilization of the African experience. That's very important, because how can you liberate people if you're not going to use their experience to be the prime motivation towards liberation? It is the utilization of the African experience as the core paradigm or model for human liberation and higher level human function.